The bright studio lights of Celebrity Spotlight with Derek Mansfield cast their familiar theatrical glow as the audience settled in for what had been promoted for weeks as an exclusive, candid conversation with living legend Chuck Norris. Derek Mansfield, a slick-talking host in his early 40s, with perfectly styled hair and an expensive suit, had built his career on viral moments born from confrontational interviews. His method was simple: invite a celebrity, then ambush them with uncomfortable questions about their past mistakes, controversies, and failures. Chuck Norris walked onto the set the way men who have spent their entire lives training in martial arts tend to walk. Straight-backed, unhurried, eyes steady and calm. At 85, he moved with slightly more deliberation than in his younger days, but his presence filled the studio the same way it had filled movie screens for half a century. He wore a simple dark blazer over a collared shirt. No flash, no theatrics. The audience erupted the moment he appeared. "Ladies and gentlemen," Derek announced with his trademark megawatt smile, "please welcome the one, the only, Chuck Norris." Chuck settled into the guest chair, nodded once to the host. "Thanks for having me, Derek." "The pleasure is mine, Chuck," Derek replied, his tone warm on the surface, but carrying the familiar predatory undertow that regular viewers had learned to recognize. "I have to say, you look remarkable for your age. Very impressive." "I keep busy," Chuck said simply. Right. Derek smiled and glanced at his notes with theatrical casualness. "Now, most people know you from Walker, Texas Ranger, from your action films, from the internet memes, which, let's be honest, have turned you into something of a pop culture punchline at this point. 2 decades of jokes about Chuck Norris counting to infinity and roundhouse kicking death itself. Does it bother you that your most enduring cultural legacy might be a meme?" A slight pause. Chuck's expression didn't change. "Not particularly," he said. "People laughing isn't the worst thing in the world." Derek sensed the audience was with him and pushed harder. Sure, but let's get real for a moment, Chuck. Your film career, and I say this with respect, was not exactly Oscar territory. Critics were brutal. Words like wooden, one-dimensional, B-movie came up a lot. You spent most of your career making films that, let's be honest, serious film people didn't take seriously. How do you square that with your self-image as this heroic, legendary figure? The studio went noticeably quieter. A few audience members shifted in their seats. Chuck looked at Derek for a moment before answering. "I never made films for critics," he said. "I made them for the people watching." "Right, but let me finish. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't loud. It was simply final." Derek stopped. "I grew up in Ryan, Oklahoma," Chuck continued, his voice unhurried and measured. "We had nothing. My father was an alcoholic who abandoned the family. My mother raised 3 boys on her own. I was a shy kid, painfully shy. I had no confidence, no direction. I joined the Air Force at 17 because I didn't know what else to do with myself." Derek opened his mouth. Chuck didn't pause. "It was in the Air Force that I discovered martial arts, Tang Soo Do. And for the first time in my life, I found something that demanded everything from me: discipline, humility, patience, and gave back something I had never had before: self-respect." He said the words without drama, as though they were simply facts. "I came back from service with nothing but a black belt and the idea that I could build something. I taught martial arts out of a garage. I competed. I lost. I competed again. I built 6 schools from the ground up through pure work." The audience, which had been holding its breath, leaned slightly forward. Then I got into films. And yes, the critics called them B-movies. But I'll tell you what those films were to the kid in a small town who felt invisible, or the single mother who needed to believe that one decent man could stand up against impossible odds. Those films meant something to real people. I know because they've been telling me for 50 years. Derek tried to regain his footing. That's a lovely story, Chuck, but Derek. Again, quiet, final. You've brought me here under the impression we'd have a conversation. So far, you've told me my career was a joke, my legacy is a meme, and my films weren't serious. I'd like to ask you something. The studio went completely still. When did you decide that tearing people down was more valuable than building something up? Derek laughed, but it came out uncertain. I'm just asking honest questions. No, Chuck said. You're doing what I've seen bullies do my entire life. You dress it up in a suit and call it journalism, but the mechanics are the same. Find someone's vulnerable point, apply pressure, watch them squirm, call it entertainment. Several people in the audience began to applaud. Derek talked over them. I think you're being a little sensitive, Chuck. You're a public figure. This is what comes with the territory. Being a public figure doesn't mean surrendering your dignity, Chuck replied. And frankly, I'm not being sensitive. I've taken punches from men who actually knew how to throw them. You're not in that category. The audience laughed, genuinely this time, not nervously. The energy in the room shifted. Chuck leaned forward slightly. Here's what I believe, and what I've tried to live by for 60 years of martial arts and everything else. Strength isn't about how hard you can hit someone when they're not expecting it. Strength is about self-control, discipline, showing up every day and doing the work, whether anyone's watching or not. It's about treating the person in front of you like they matter, because they do. He gestured around the studio. You have a platform. You have an audience that trusts you enough to show up every week. And you have chosen to spend that platform making people feel small. That's not entertainment. That's a waste. Derek sat back. His smile was gone entirely now. I'm not here to destroy you, Chuck said, his tone dropping to something almost private, though every microphone in the room picked it up perfectly. I've never been interested in that. But I'm not going to sit in your chair and pretend that what you just did was acceptable, because it wasn't, and everyone in this room knows it. The applause started slowly, then built like a wave. Several people stood. Within seconds, the entire studio was on its feet. Chuck rose from his chair, nodded once to the audience, once to a speechless Derek Mansfield, and walked off the stage with the same unhurried calm with which he had walked on. The clip went viral within hours. Social media erupted. Chuck Norris School's talk show host trended worldwide before the episode had even finished airing on the East Coast. The moment that resonated most, captured in hundreds of clips in reaction videos, wasn't a punchline or a dramatic outburst. It was the absolute stillness of a man who had nothing to prove and knew it. The meme was always wrong, wrote one user. Chuck Norris's superpower isn't violence, it's composure. I grew up watching Walker. I never understood why until right now, posted another. Sponsors began distancing themselves from Derek's show within 48 hours. The network announced a format review, language the industry understood immediately. Celebrity Spotlight never returned from hiatus. Derek Mansfield retreated from public life. His social media went quiet. The few statements released through his publicist were terse and unconvincing. 6 months later, he published a longer apology, acknowledging that his interview style had been dehumanizing and that he had lost sight of the responsibility that comes with a public platform. He announced he was entering therapy. The response was muted. Some accepted it. Most had already moved on. 3 weeks after the incident, Chuck appeared on a different program, a long-form conversation show known for its depth and civility. When the host asked about the Derek Mansfield interview, Chuck was quiet for a moment before answering. "I don't enjoy watching someone's career collapse," he said. "I hope he does the work and comes out better for it. Everyone deserves the chance to grow." "Were you angry during the interview?" the host asked. Chuck considered the question. "No. Anger is a luxury I stopped affording myself a long time ago. Martial arts teaches you that the moment you let emotion drive your actions, you've already lost. I just said what was true." "And what's true?" "That everybody's fighting something. Everybody has a story behind the story. And if you have a microphone or a camera or any kind of platform, the bare minimum responsibility is not to make that fight harder for people than it already is." He paused. "I spent 50 years playing characters who stood up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves. That was fiction. But the principle behind it, that was always real to me." The incident became a case study in journalism programs and media ethics courses. Derek's approach was held up as a textbook example of exploitative celebrity culture. The follow-up interview was screened as an example of what meaningful conversation could look like. Chuck Norris continued training, continued working, and continued quietly donating to veterans' causes and children's charities, work he had been doing for decades with little fanfare. The respect earned from his handling of the Mansfield situation opened new doors for conversations about martial arts philosophy, mental resilience, and what real strength actually looks like. In later interviews, when asked about his proudest moments, Chuck would mention his martial arts championships, yes, but also the schools he built, the students he trained, and the day in that television studio when he chose composure over combat and found it was the more powerful option by far. "The memes got one thing right," he said once, with a rare smile. "I don't lose fights, but most people misunderstand why. It's not because I hit the hardest. It's because I've learned that most fights don't need to happen at all. And the ones that do, you win before they start, by knowing exactly who you are."